Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goët.
Georgia's hardline conservative Secretary of State has been kind of a pioneer in ways to make voting harder in Georgia. His office has been really gung-ho about canceling people's voter registrations in that state. His office canceled over 600,000 voter registrations last year alone. Think about that, 600,000 people who thought they were registered, he canceled them. They've been closing voting precincts, often in poor and minority districts. He's been doing this kind of thing since we started covering him years ago. This year, however, that hardline elections official, that Republican Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, is not just the state of Georgia's hardline top elections official. This year, he's also running for the state's highest office. Republican Secretary of State Brian Kemp is running against Democrat Stacey Abrams to become Georgia governor this year. And that means that Secretary of State Brian Kemp is now in charge of an election in which he is running at the top of the ticket. What could possibly go wrong? Tonight, the Associated Press reports that more than 53,000 voter registration applications are sitting in a desk drawer at the Georgia Secretary of State's office on hold. So these are applications from people who are trying to register to vote this year. Many of these tens of thousands of voter applications are being held and not processed by Kemp's office because of a system he's implemented called exact match, which means if you drop a hyphen in your last name, or somebody at the elections office types in your name with one letter wrong so that it doesn't match information already on file with the state, well, your application is put on hold indefinitely, and the state doesn't tell you how to fix it, if it even tells you the application is on hold at all. You may or may not be surprised to hear that this system of exact matching affects certain groups of Georgians more than others. Quote, an analysis of the records obtained by the AP reveals racial disparity in the process. Georgia's population is approximately 32% black, but the list of voter registrations on hold with Kemp's office is nearly 70% black. Oh, it's affecting black Georgians at more than double the rate of their prevalence in the population. This would be a flashing red light story less than a month out from any election, but especially approaching the Georgia governor's race. Polls in that race show a toss-up. 53,000 votes is a lot of votes in a race that close. And again, these are people who have filled out the application, who are trying to be registered to vote. Many of these people may not even know that their effort was not successful. The Democratic candidate, Stacey Abrams, the first black woman major party nominee for governor in American history. Particularly, her campaign strategy explicitly depends on turning out black voters and registering new voters. And her opponent, Brian Kemp, is the Republican Secretary of State who's holding up 53,000 voter applications in his office. You know, past Georgia secretaries of state who have run for governor have stepped down from being Secretary of State in order to run. Because it's a bad look to be in charge of the integrity of your own election, right? But Brian Kemp is not stepping down. He's staying in charge, saying everything is just fine. You can absolutely trust him. If you are a Georgia voter and your registration is in limbo on Election Day, you can still cast a provisional ballot, which I suppose may be counted eventually once your application is processed, if it is processed. But this is the situation in Georgia right now, 26 days before the election. And honestly, this is outrageous enough that it seems almost impossible that the courts will allow this to stand.
It is Friday, the 12th of October of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the diner of life. That's right. Oh, here, have a little French 77 as we start. It's in the afternoon somewhere in the world, and you know that old joke, okay? But it's a virtual French 77, the most balanced cocktail in the history of cocktails. And you'll need it for today, because there's a lot going on. Brian Kemp, they are just so brazen. I always try this little mental exercise. I know a lot of people do. But imagine if a Democrat was doing what this guy is doing. I think that he would be shackled wrist and ankle and literally frog marched down the steps of whatever government building he happens to be at. And they'll take him right to prison. It is just so amazing. Now, we have heard before about the Good Old Boys Club in Georgia, specifically Georgia, if not the whole South. And the Good Old Boys Club does not have any black women in it. And no one gets elected in Georgia until they pass muster with the Good Old Boys Network. And black women are not going to be passing muster, and they make sure. So they're pulling out all the stops. And Rachel does posit a concern at the end that she doesn't think that any court would allow this. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, the Supreme Court would now. You would think there might be a little Article 2 of the Voting Rights Act aspect that might still apply here. But you need to have an attorney general, apparently, who's not a racist and a bigot. Okay, well, rust never sleeps. It's a caustic agent that just destroys from within. Just pits it and makes it weak. And that's exactly what they're doing here. Got Tucker Carlson out there telling people that Planned Parenthood is the leading cause of death in America. Which just goes to show Tucker Carlson is the leading cause of the dumbing down of America. Jeez, where's Harold Bloom when you need him? Did we ever need Harold Bloom? Yikes, I don't think so. Oh, boy. And this Khashoggi mess is just getting messier. Khashoggi got on the Saudi Arabian shit list in 2016, for criticizing Trump's Middle East policy. Fancy that. And he was on the shit list so bad, he had to leave the country. That is why he left the country, for criticizing Trump's Middle East policy. And now we find out that Trump knew of the Saudi Arabian plan to lure Khashoggi to some place where they could kill him. Trump knew and did nothing about it. Coincidence? Let's look at some little tidbits that we know. Trump has publicly announced that he would like to kill journalists who criticize him. He would like to. But he's found out that in America, we have proxies who do that for us, like the Saudis. Okay. And what's with the number 15? I got to look that one up. Because, that was what? That was a number that flew some planes. back in the day. What's on the rest of the menu today? Because we have a curated show, it being the last day of the week. Hey, we're not going to let this French 77, virtual or otherwise, keep us from our appointed tasks. No, of course not. We're the salon with the mostest, really. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, a Florida PTA dad, that's Parent-Teacher Association, is running against a Republican state senator who earned thousands from the charter school industry. White secessionist Ammon Bundy will headline a gathering of anti-government, anti-Native American extremists in Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke's hometown of Whitefish, Montana. Hey, that Richard Spencer guy, that's his hometown too. Wow, is Montana trying to get into some tourist competition with Idaho for the white secessionist tourist trade? And Trump hints that he plans to seriously obstruct justice after the midterms. A lot more than he's doing now, apparently. Well, then after the break, we then move to the chef's table, where Trump just nominated 13 more judges to lifetime appointments on the federal bench, and none of them are women. And I just have to add, thank you, Chuck Schumer. Who are you, our Neville Chamberlain? And British Petroleum's defense attorney for the Deepwater Horizon oil blowout is confirmed by the Senate to become the nation's top environmental lawyer. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Go to our homepage at netrootsradio.com, and there are links there right as you open the page. It's a scroll. You'll notice it. Very pretty scroll, by the way. Thank you, Tom, for that whole page. Please go to netrootsradio.com. Check those links out to determine if you are registered to vote. And register to vote. Please do. And we got to pull out all the stops. I mean, look. Brian Kemp's got 53,000 applications right now that he's holding, just because he can. And but we got to overcome all of those nefarious restrictions that they like to impose on people who are going to vote him out. So let's do it. Then scroll to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. The chat room link is on the rightish of the page, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Do please check out her show on Saturdays, At the Table with Kelly Lincoln. Begins at 3 p.m. on the West Coast, 6 p.m. on the East Coast. And then later on, she teams up with Ricky for the Roundtable Roundhouse Power Hour, which they command, beginning at 9 p.m. West Coast, midnight on the East Coast, and a power hour it is. You can then please do take a gander over to the leftish of the page from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. The contribute button is right there. Do please, please, please become a Patreon of Netroots Radio. Our income went down a little bit when we made this changeover, so we need to get a few more, please. Resistance Radio doesn't come free; they make you pay your bills, and we do. So we're not getting any extra money. There's no super PAC. Be nice. Maybe I should make a super PAC. Except I just have to throw out all of my ethics and morality to be able to, I don't know, become a grifter. It's just so hard. You can't be a grifter if you have a conscience. Damn it. I'm just not fit for this world. in this time. Darn. Well, regardless of that, if you could become a Patreon of Netroots Radio, thank you for your generosity. Thank you. And thank you to those who are already. You can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Check us out on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, just like it sounds. And I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes or so before showtime. And that, is, of course, is found at Daily Co's, where I can be found as Justice Putnam. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. We are on Facebook. We're also on Tumblr. That's weird. So's Netroots Radio, all sorts of those social media platforms. So if you're there, you can find us and the links at those platforms. It's Friday, and I haven't even had a French 77 yet. Okay, so then also get podcasts of the show by way of TuneIn, iHeart, Stitcher, Spreaker, iTunes, even YouTube, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Alrighty. So, this first story here comes out of Share Blue Media by Oliver Willis. Now, this PTA president, David Perez, is a public school advocate. Oh, wow. You mean part of the violent mob. Jeez, these people. And he leads that PTA at his local elementary school and is taking on a Republican state representative who has earned hundreds of thousands from the charter school industry. David Perez, PTA president of North Hialeah Elementary, located near Miami, is running for a seat on the Florida Senate, and he has vowed to fight against, quote, all attempts to shift public funds to for-profit charter schools, end quote. Perez's opponent, Manny Diaz Jr., who currently is a Republican member of the Florida House of Representatives, has used his position in politics to help steer business toward charter schools and in the process has enriched himself. Well, government works best that pays those who try to grift government. I think it's in their business model, isn't it? Diaz-backed legislation later signed into law by Republican Governor Rick Scott, who, let's remind ourselves, paid the largest fine ever for defrauding government when he was running his private health care biz. And now he's taken that kind of business acumen to run Florida like a business. Well, that allowed charter schools to hire teachers, this law that Rick Scott signed, allowed charter schools to hire teachers who have not been licensed by the state. Well, of course not. Charter schools, the whole idea of a for-profit thing is, getting money and then cutting back on services so you can make more money. And if you have to hire someone with a license, they expect to get paid more, and they do. And if they have a license, they're not working at that charter school. Parent groups and teacher unions opposed the bill, but Diaz pushed it along from his position as chairman of the Florida House's Pre-K through 12 Appropriations Subcommittee. He did so even though, as the Miami Herald noted, he faced lingering questions about his ties to the charter school industry. Well, I don't know. I think they're doing the Joey Bishop thing of just deny, deny, deny. Even when you're caught red-handed, your wife is in the bedroom and your secretary's getting dressed, going out the door, and you just deny that any of that is happening. And then, when the front door closes, you can always sum up by saying, "What woman?" And everybody looks around. Room is empty. Everything's tidied up. It must have just been in our heads. That's how they get away with it. In addition to the bill allowing unlicensed teachers, Diaz also pushed for pro-charter legislation to allow schools to continue operations even while under investigation, which passed after being put into a bigger bill. Let's see. Well, Also, while serving in the House, Diaz also collects a paycheck as the chief operating officer of Doral College. Wow. The same type of charter schools that Diaz advocates for while in session, and that also funnels money directly to Doral. One company, Academica, paid millions to Doral for college courses. At the same time, Diaz earned a six-figure salary from Doral. Apparently, what you get just from your regular grifting in the Florida House of Reps is just not enough. You have to supplement that somehow. Well, it seems to be a lot more lucrative than getting tips bartending. Huh. At the launch of his campaign, Perez described himself as a product of the public school system, elementary, middle school, and high school. Perez, who is a firefighter lieutenant, also highlighted his PTA credentials and the fact that his 12-year-old son is currently in public school. I see what is happening to public school funding, and that is an issue for me. In a release, he said Diaz has sold out public education for personal profit. Well, it looks like it. Despite Diaz's entrenched position in state government, recent fundraising reports show Perez with a slight edge over the Republican. Diaz has spent years doing the bidding of the charter school industry while steering money into his personal bank account as a product. Perez's campaign is advocating for local schools and students, which Diaz appears to have forgotten. And I might actually edit that and say that Diaz never had any intention of helping local schools and students. They're just a vehicle in which he can extract money in his endless grift. Casey Michelle of Think Progress brings us this next offering here at the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, it looks like Ammon Bundy, that white secessionist, bigot, he's going to be headlining a conference of other white nationalist anti-government bigots and anti-Native American extremists. At a conference in Montana, in Ryan Zinke's hometown of Whitefish, and Zinke has been, mysteriously silent. I don't think it's so mysterious. Nearly 3 years after Ammon Bundy helped lead an armed standoff against authorities in southeastern Oregon, the anti-government extremist has not slowed down his efforts. He has kept himself in the news by flirting with a run for office and suggesting there may be future standoffs to come, along with continuing to court fellow far-right and notoriously anti-Native American activists such as those expected to gather this weekend in Whitefish, Montana. Bundy is slated to headline the Code of the West Conference, a one-day conclave dedicated to cleaning out corruption from the Crooked Corral. The conference is sponsored by a group called The West is Our West. The hour is capitalized, like a yell. The event appears to be something of a coming-out party for the organization, as well as one of the biggest gatherings for political extremists across the American West in months. Well, the fires kept a lot of the usual gatherings at bay. If there is any question about the types of conspiratorial activists and politicals drawn to a group that believes in a global agenda against the American West, the conference's schedule of speakers is a who's who among the more extreme voices in the region. Not all of them took part in Bundy's 2016 standoff in Oregon, nor in his father's 2014 standoff in Nevada, which resulted in the greatest concentration of domestic terrorists the U.S. had witnessed in years, but all appear sympathetic to the Bundy family's efforts to resort to armed threats against the American government. While Bundy has taken top billing, he'll be joined by Jeanette Finicum, the wife of deceased militant Lavoy Finicum. You know, the guy that pointed a gun at some cops when they pulled him over, when during that standoff, and they shot him dead. And I know there was some... what a mess, a cluster F that whole court case was. And let's remind ourselves once again, too, is that for the first time in the history of Oregon, instead of drawing a jury from where the court case was being held, they drew a jury pool from all over the state. And essentially got some jury nullification types on the jury on purpose. These people gathering are obviously your usual suspects. But there's one question hanging over the conference. Why hasn't Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke commented on the extremist gathering? He's gone out of his way to avoid discussing the conference or whether he was invited to speak, despite efforts to get him to comment. As the Southern Poverty Law Center wrote, Zinke has not commented publicly on this weekend's gathering in his hometown or if he was invited to attend, and his office did not respond to Think Progress's questions on the topic. Now, it looks like the Bundy group are moving more and more into Montana. Most of these recent gatherings have been in the state. And one speaker, though, highlighted, points to a notably darker side of the conference, and that has not gotten much attention: anti-Native American rhetoric and outright white supremacy when it comes to relations with tribal governments. One speaker, Elaine Willman, is identified as the most prominent anti-Indian activist in the Northwest, and it's not difficult to see why when you go to her Facebook page. Yeah, it's filled with, your ancestors did not steal this country. They built this country. Where's our White History Month? Well, I think White History Month is every month. And she's one of the faces of the anti-Native American group called Citizens for Equal Rights Alliance, CIRA. And now it hasn't gained any national traction, but I guess now it will. Also of Think Progress brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. During a lengthy interview on Fox and Friends on Thursday morning, Trump hinted he might make serious moves to end the FBI investigation into his own campaign after next month's midterm elections. He was asked about the Washington Post report that he's in active talks to replace Jeff Sessions. And Trump says, I'm not doing anything. I want to get the elections over with. Then we'll see what happens. I'm very disappointed that we go through this witch hunt, this ridiculous witch hunt. There's no collusion. There's no collusion. There's no collusion, Trump added before pushing an absurd conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton colluded with Russia to defeat herself. Well, of course, we know how Trump feels about Sessions and why he wants to get rid of him. And he also has expressed his disappointment with Rosenstein, and with Mueller. But I think at this point, whatever Trump does here on forward, it's not going to stop the investigation Mueller has put into play. And elections do have consequences. So let's get on to our break, and when we come back, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, film noir meets Mean Girls. The best things about the screen adaptation of the witty dark comedy A Simple Favor are the leads, Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively, who elevate their characters to way beyond the caricatures they could have easily become. Both create memorable, complex portrayals of women who aren't exactly what they appear to be. At first glance, the two couldn't appear more different. Kendrick Stephanie is a widowed mother who creates a world of tranquil domesticity, both via her video channel as well as her hands-on approach towards raising her young son. On the other hand, we have Emily, a successful, hard-drinking New York PR executive who appears to have everything and who has an outsourcing approach to motherhood. Nevertheless, the two become friends, and when Emily goes missing under mysterious circumstances, it's Stephanie who steps into the role of surrogate mother to Emily's son, and later a surrogate wife to her husband Sean, played by Henry Golding of recent Crazy Rich Asians fame. On the way to finding out what happens to Emily, we're treated to a tale where twists and turns abound, some funny and some pretty disturbing, all of which make for a truly suspenseful ride. Many will identify with Stephanie's character, who is coping with raising a child with insufficient support, but who nonetheless wants to be the sort of mom that society praises. But being this way, and being eager for adult friendship, leads her to falling into doormat territory, arguably where her troubles begin, when the sophisticated Emily shows interest in her. Likewise, Emily shows how motherhood doesn't necessarily alter a woman's core character. There's nothing simple about A Simple Favor. With Stephanie's vlog, a wonderfully cheesy detective, and cutesy postscript, director Paul Feig navigates a dark story that still manages to offer some solid laughs. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Lucy Wong. About 1.5 billion people speak English around the world, but for more than 1.1 billion of them, English is their second language, often with a noticeable accent.
Your accent really reveals a lot about who you are and your identity. It will tell people what your native language is, be able to tell you probably where you come from.
Mark Pell, a communications professor at McGill University in Montreal. And according to Pell, one reaction to a different accent can be a bias against that person.
Previous research that has been done elsewhere showed that people who have an accent tend to be trusted less, simply because they have an accent. But the idea that we would have a bias against anyone who sort of doesn't sound like us, I think probably relates to some sort of evolutionary or long-standing suspicion we have of outsiders or strangers. So this might be sort of an ingrained response that we have to the accent.
But accents aren't the only thing we listen for when we have to decide if we trust another person. Tone of voice also plays a role. Pell and his team wanted to know if people would trust a confident tone, even if it came from someone with an accent. The researchers had Canadian English speakers listen to different versions of people saying neutral statements like, "She has access to the building," while they were getting a brain scan in an MRI machine. Subjects heard someone say it with a confident neutral tone with a Canadian English accent, an Australian accent, or a French accent. Participants also heard the sentence with the three accents spoken in a doubtful or neutral tone. The MRI scan showed that the participants had to use more brain power to decide if they could trust the statement said with the non-native accents. When the study participants heard the Australian or French accents, Blood flow increased to the temporal lobe, part of the brain that we use to process sound.
They seem to have to analyze that perhaps more intensively or for a longer period of time to make this decision about whether they truly believed the speaker.
The work is in the journal Neuroimage. When asked, the participants reported not trusting either the Australian or French accents, except for when the statements were said confidently. Seems that confidence speaks for itself.
You can help stop the Trump agenda in its tracks. Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. And on November 6th, vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
Credit where credit is due. Judge, now Justice Brett Kavanaugh, has taught the American people how decisions at the Supreme Court really will be made. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. At the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Kavanaugh blamed the opposition to his nomination not on any legitimate concern about sexual assaults, but rather on a great left-wing conspiracy seeking revenge against him on behalf of the Clintons. In an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal that followed, Kavanaugh wrote, quote, "I said a few things at the hearing that I should not have said." But in that op-ed, Kavanaugh made no retraction, leaving the lasting impression that the Supreme Court really is just another political branch of government that implements the politics and beliefs of the people who held power when the justices were nominated and confirmed. The Supreme Court, throughout much of the nation's history, has benefited from the popular, although hardly universal, belief that the justices make decisions based primarily on the Constitution and the law. That perception, though hardly unchallenged, has remained significantly intact, notwithstanding the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings and the court's embarrassingly unprincipled decision in Bush versus Gore, where the court, not the people, elected Bush president. And now, Kavanaugh. Leaving the question, can the Supreme Court reclaim legitimacy? The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Michael, now a post-tropical cyclone, headed into the Atlantic Ocean early Friday morning. But the storm, one of the strongest ever to hit the continental U.S., leaves in its wake a trail of death and destruction from the Florida Panhandle to the Mid-Atlantic. 11 deaths have now been blamed on Michael, including 4 dead in Florida, 1 in North Carolina, an 11-year-old girl in Georgia, and 5 in Virginia. 4 were related to people being swept away in floodwaters. The 5th was a firefighter who was killed in a crash along a highway. Almost 1.4 million customers in 7 states are without electricity. Mexico Beach, Florida, is pretty much gone. The coastal town took the brunt of Michael's 155-mile-per-hour winds when it blew ashore Wednesday. Turkey says it has video and audio evidence that missing Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. CNN has the story.
Tonight, a senior Republican senator tells CNN that he believes the missing journalist Jamal Khashoggi is dead and that Saudi Arabia is likely responsible.
The intel points directly at them and them thinking about this in advance. And I think they did it, and unfortunately I think that he's deceased.
CNN has confirmed that the U.S. has intercepts of Saudi officials discussing a plan to lure Khashoggi back from the U.S. where he lived to Saudi Arabia and detain him there. U.S. officials say Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman would likely have had to approve of such a plan, but cautioned that he may not have known the specifics of the operation. The Saudi government vehemently denies any involvement. Turkish police say they have evidence otherwise. Their assessment is that Khashoggi was allegedly killed at the consulate. The New York Times citing Turkish officials who say his body was cut up into pieces with a bone saw and taken out. Khashoggi himself, his friends tell CNN, long feared what the Saudi government would do to him if he ever returned to his home country.
Inside the Oval Office on Thursday, Donald Trump weighed in.
First, I want to find out what happened, and we're looking. Again, this took place in Turkey. And to the best of our knowledge, Khashoggi is not a United States citizen. Is that right? Or is that right? He's a permanent resident. Okay. We don't like it, John. We don't like it, and we don't like it even a little bit. But as to whether or not we should stop $110 billion from being spent in this country, knowing they have 4 or 5 alternatives, 2 very good alternatives, that would not be acceptable to me. Okay, but we're looking for the answer. And I think probably you'll have an answer sooner than people think.
Despite Trump's insistence that the Saudis are spending $110 billion with the U.S., according to Bruce Riedel of the Brookings Institution, that's fake news. The Washington Post reporting that most of the publicly announced items had been previously announced by the Obama administration, and there appear to be few, if any, signed contracts. Rather, many of the announcements were memorandums of intent. There were 6 specific items adding up to $28 billion, but all had been previously notified to Congress by the Obama administration. After Trump's remarks on Khashoggi, Riedel said the $110 billion figure was, quote, still fake. With less than 4 weeks to go until Election Day, Georgia's Democratic candidate for governor, Stacey Abrams, wants her Republican opponent, Georgia's Secretary of State Brian Kemp, to resign his job. Rachel Maddow explains.
As the sitting Secretary of State in Georgia, Brian Kemp is in charge of elections in that state. He has not stepped down from those responsibilities, even though he himself will be at the top of the ticket in November because he's the Republican Party's candidate for governor. So he's effectively supervising his own election. Based on new reporting from the AP, Brian Kemp's office has put on hold 53,000 applications for voter registrations in his state. So these are people who have tried to register to vote in this year's election in Georgia, but the Secretary of State's office is not letting them do it. These people have submitted their voter registration applications. Secretary of State is holding them and not letting them go through. Of the 53,000 applications, the AP reports that nearly 70% of those applications are from African American voters. The overall population in Georgia is like somewhere between 30 and 35% black. 70% of the applications he's blocking are from black voters. Since the AP first reported on this problem in Georgia, and this is a big problem, tens of thousands of registrations, there's been sort of a growing uproar, not just in that state, but around the country about it. Well, tonight, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights has announced that they've filed a lawsuit against Brian Kemp over those registrations that he and his office are blocking ahead of his own gubernatorial election. Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights seems fairly confident in their prospects of beating Brian Kemp in this lawsuit. They say they have beaten him in the past on this same issue, and they expect to do so again.
Washington State's Supreme Court has ruled that the death penalty is unconstitutional and converted all pending death sentences to life imprisonment. Over the course of 12 months, the U.S. Army discharged more than 500 immigrant enlistees who were recruited across the globe for their language or medical skills and promised a fast track to citizenship in exchange for their service. And that's a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. Anti-death penalty campaigners scored 2 major victories on Thursday as Washington State and the Asian nation of Malaysia both moved to end capital punishment, joining 19 other U.S. states and 105 countries in doing so. Washington's Supreme Court deemed the death penalty to be, quote, invalid because it is imposed in an arbitrary and racially biased manner. That ruling came after a pair of reports commissioned by a death row inmate found not only significant county-by-county variation in decisions to seek or impose the death penalty, but that, quote, black defendants were 4.5 times more likely to be sentenced to death than similarly situated white defendants. The court agreed, citing its notice of implicit and overt racial bias against black defendants in Washington, and expressing confidence that, quote, the association between race and the death penalty is not attributed to random chance. Since 2000, 8 U.S. states have banned the death penalty, but in a sign of American opinions on the practice, all 8 states are blue states, or at least voted for Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. Overseas, the newly elected government of Malaysia, led by a prime minister who campaigned on paring back the country's most oppressive laws, announced Thursday the death penalty would be abolished full stop. That decision will immediately spare 1,200 death row inmates as lawmakers set in motion a process to formally prohibit executions by hanging. The story of one death row inmate, a 29-year-old man jailed and sentenced to death for selling cannabis oil, appears to have had a profound effect in changing the country's laws. Over the last decade, some 16 countries have formally abolished capital punishment, and the UN has called on all remaining death penalty states to do so immediately. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table, a West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. And the French 77s are absolutely ready for your imbibing pleasure, virtual or otherwise. So please do. We all need a little bit of French 77 to get through the resistance. Looks like here along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, it is currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Chilly nights for us, yes. At altitude, though, it got down below freezing. We are in an active frost warning for the area in my little microclimate. As yesterday, we didn't get down that far, but still chilly. We are slated to have some overnight lows in the low 40s for the next 5 days or so, but our days are going to be a tad warmer than they've been. We have been in about the mid 70s, but now we're going to be up in the 80 or the low 80s. We'll say low 80s, because it's not going to be in the upper 70s. It will be in the low 80s. And yeah, so that's how people catch pneumonia, at least in my experience. Let's avoid it. Okay. Winds are currently out of the east, which portends the reason why we're having these warmer days. And they will be light and variable also for the next several days. And I might add, not a lick of a possibility of rain. Please give me just 10%. Say 10%. I'll be happy then. I can live through this. Ragweed pollen has gone down to moderate. The air quality index is good, though it has raised a couple of ticks up to 21. And our fall daytime UV index is rated moderate at 4, the angle of the sun. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and humidity is at 76%, so it may get a little bit lower than that as the day progresses. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. And these people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Yes, they do. The folks in London are registering 69 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 76 and partly cloudy. Rome is 77 and sunny. God, I wouldn't mind being in either Paris or Rome right now, to be honest with you. Kiev is 60 and fair. Kabul is 57 and fair. Hong Kong is 72 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 66 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 56 and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 53 degrees and sunny with a small craft advisory for gusting winds, about 40 to 60 mile gusts on the bay and out there offshore. So be careful. Small craft, be careful. And New York is 59 degrees and partly cloudy. And you have a flood advisory because, you're getting some of that Michael. Yeah. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Bullard of Share Blue Media brings us this first offering at the Chef's Table of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Now, he pauses this question about has Trump learned nothing from the national responses to Kavanaugh in that he just nominated 13 more judges and none of them are women. I don't think it's a matter of learning. He just doesn't care. He'll double down and, you want women? I'll make sure you don't get women. So, coming after male leaders of the GOP helped cram through the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. Brat? We should call him Brat Kavanaugh. Despite credible allegations of sexual assault, this week's judicial announcement continues Trump's long tradition of overlooking women in the legal. According to one summertime tabulation, Trump had nominated 135 people to federal courts, yet just 35 of them are women. And of Trump's confirmed nominees who received lifetime appointment, just 23% were women. That compares to 42% of women who landed lifetime judicial appointments during President Barack Obama's 8 years in office. Obama nominated and confirmed 2 women to the U.S. Supreme Court. Trump was nominated and confirmed 2 men. Well, he had to balance it out, back to how it was so imbalanced before. Additionally, when Trump first put forward his list of 42 U.S. attorneys last year, 41 were men, and of Obama's first 42 nominees for that position, 12 were women. It's a slap in the face, Joyce Vance, a former U.S. attorney in Alabama who was one of Obama's early nominees, said at the time. U.S. attorney positions are highly coveted and often lead to careers at elite law firms or nominations to the federal bench. There seems to be a gaping disconnect when it comes to Republicans, women, and the law. During Kavanaugh's controversial confirmation hearing, after Dr. Christine Blasey Ford vividly detailed her allegations that Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted her in high school, Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee were forced to hire an outside prosecutor, I would say inquisitor, to ask questions because they didn't want the GOP's all-male panel to be involved. And eventually they were involved, with Republican men casting doubt on Ford's testimony. No Republican woman has ever served on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and today, of the 23 women in the Senate, only 6 are Republicans. Last week, the committee's chairman, Senator Chuck Grassley, suggested the committee is just too much work for women. And Trump's snubbing of women extends far beyond the legal profession. Last year, it was revealed that women working in the White House face an enormous pay gap, the type that would have been more common in the early 1980s, when women were paid 35% less than men. Trump just doesn't seem to view women as equals now, does he?
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Mark Hand of Think Progress helps us finish up here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Well, the Senate on Thursday narrowly confirmed Jeffrey Bossert Clark, a lawyer who defended BP after the Deepwater Horizon, and I wish they would stop calling it an oil spill. It was a blowout. Damn it. To be Assistant Attorney General for the Department of Justice's Environment and Natural Resources Division. In a 52-45 vote, Joe Manchin and Claire McCaskill joined all Republicans present in voting to confirm Clark. The DOJ office handles all environmental litigation, including bringing both civil and criminal cases against companies and individuals that violate pollution control laws. The office is responsible for enforcing the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Safe Drinking Act and other major federal environmental laws. So I guess that means this guy's there not to bring litigation and protect all of those acts, but to dismantle them. And the Senate Judiciary Committee approved the nomination of Clark, a partner at the law firm of Kirkland and Ellis LLP, in the summer of 2017, but the White House had to re-nominate him this year because the full Senate failed to vote on his nomination before the end of 2017. Oh, just too bad. Well, he did work as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the same DOJ division during the George W. Bush administration. How convenient. After BP's massive 2010 Deepwater Horizon rig blowout, thank you. They called it a blowout. Oh, and the subsequent oil spill. I wouldn't call it an oil spill. A blowout is still a blowout. Clark successfully defended the company against a multi-billion-dollar appeal brought by 11 Louisiana parishes. And Clark was also lead counsel on BP's appeal of the historic damages award in the Deepwater Horizon case, which was prosecuted by the same division of the Justice Department that Clark will now run. Clark's record, however, at both the Department of Justice and in private practice shows him to have strong opposition to critical environmental protections, including EPA's efforts to curb climate change, using best available science in policymaking, and safety requirements for offshore oil and gas operations. The American people expect and deserve much better from the nation's top environmental lawyer, and that was by Senator Tom Carper, Democrat of Delaware. And, of course, he's given talks at the Federalist Society, and they just love him. We got to get rid of all these regulations. Oh, the people that got incinerated on the Deepwater Horizon platform? Expendable. We had janitor policies on them anyway, so we made money on the deaths. Every company should be able to do that. It's what makes America great again now, doesn't it? Of course, that's in this reporter's opinion. Which also brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and also for the week. But Networks Radio broadcasts on throughout the weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will visit with you on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So stay tuned to Networks Radio all day and throughout all the weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks all the time. And we will visit with you on Monday in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.